Nike just handed Caitlin Clark a $28 million check, which stands as the biggest rookie endorsement deal in WNBA history. But that massive payout isn't what's actually keeping their executives awake at night. This is the part of the story that nobody is talking about yet. We aren't just looking at a brand betting on a rising star, because this is actually a warning sign for every company that built an empire by controlling athletes. Clark isn't just another player Nike signed to a contract. She is a massive market force they can't fully contain, and the data makes that reality uncomfortably clear. By the time we finish this video, you'll see why Nike's own Jordan playbook is the very thing that terrifies them most right now. That exact strategy turned a $500,000 bet into a $7 billion brand. But the game has changed. We're breaking this down across 7 chapters with hard data, a CEO-level scorecard, and a map of exactly what happens next. Let's get into it. We need to start with the raw numbers because they tell a story that doesn't need any extra spin. When Clark plays a home game, the attendance runs 105% higher than the league average. And when she hits the road, the opponents see their own home attendance jump by 87%. During her debut WNBA season, the overall league viewership spiked by 200%, which means these aren't just small gains. This is one single player moving a metric that entire marketing departments spend decades trying to budge. If we look at the media value, the picture gets even crazier. Indiana Fever games alone drove 45% of the total WNBA broadcast sponsor value across the entire 2024 regular season, and the top individual games hit $1.42 million in sponsor value per game. To put that in perspective, one regular season WNBA game is now generating the kind of value that networks used to ignore entirely. The merchandise numbers tell the same story from a different angle, as WNBA-wide sales on Fanatics surged 500% year over year, while player-specific sales jumped by 1,000%. Clark sat right at the top of basketball jersey sales across the entire league, and that includes both the men's and women's categories combined. These aren't just WNBA records, they are basketball records, period. Now we have to connect this to the money that actually moves global markets. The WNBA recently signed an 11-year media rights deal worth $2.2 billion with Amazon, NBC, and Disney to cover over 125 games every year. That is a 250% increase from the previous deal of $57 million per year. And multiple analysts pointed to the 2024 viewership surge as the primary reason networks agreed to that price. That deal simply does not happen at that number without her. If you look back just 1 year further, the picture gets even sharper. The 2024 NCAA Women's Final, which was Clark's last college game, drew 18.9 million viewers, while the men's final that same year only pulled 14.8 million. Women's college basketball beat the men in a head-to-head ratings matchup for the first time in history. Even after she turned pro, the 2025 Women's Final still drew 8.6 million viewers, which is double what the 2022 final produced. She didn't just spike the numbers while she was there, she permanently raised the floor for the entire sport. That is the actual scope of what we're talking about today. This isn't just a hot rookie season or a short-term ratings bump. It's a structural reset in what women's basketball is worth as a media asset and a merchandise category. Nike saw all of this. They tracked every data point, and they wrote the check. So where does the fear come in? That's chapter 2. To understand why a $28 million deal actually makes sense, you have to look at the corner Nike had backed themselves into. Back in 1984, Nike was losing the game, and they were losing it badly. Adidas was the king of the court, while Converse had the biggest stars in the world, with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. Nike's basketball division was hemorrhaging cash, and the higher-ups knew they needed a move that would either save the brand or prove it was time to quit for good. That's when they found a 21-year-old rookie out of North Carolina who actually liked Adidas better and didn't even want to show up for the meeting. Nike offered him $500,000 a year, his own royalties, and a signature shoe line, which was enough to get Jordan's team to sign on the dotted line. When the Air Jordan 1 finally hit shelves in 1985, it brought in $70 million in just 2 months, completely shattering the $2 million goal they had set for the entire year. Fast forward to 2024, and the Jordan brand is pulling in $7 billion annually, while Michael Jordan himself clears over $350 million every year just in royalty checks. This is the exact same playbook Nike is using with Caitlin Clark, and they aren't being subtle about it. We're talking about a signature shoe, a custom logo, a full clothing line, and the entire backbone of a sub-brand. The CC1 represents their first real shot at building a women's version of the Jordan brand, and they are leaning into those similarities on purpose. But before we get into the real trouble, we have to look at how they handled Serena Williams. Nike spent decades turning Serena into a global icon, and their Dream Crazier campaign in 2019 was a masterclass in branding. They framed her as the leader of a generation of women athletes who had been ignored or told they were too much, and the world ate it up. But here's the thing, that campaign happened 20 years into their partnership, giving Nike 2 decades to control her story and decide exactly how her image would be sold to the public. Caitlin Clark is hitting those same milestones in about 3 years instead of 20. That massive speed up is exactly why Nike is starting to feel a little bit of terror. Before Clark ever touched a Nike contract, she had already built a $3 million empire through NIL deals with giants like State Farm, Gatorade, and Buick. She didn't walk into negotiations as a blank slate. She walked in as a superstar with a massive fan base that felt like they helped build her career. This was only possible because of the 2021 NIL policy changes, something that didn't exist when Jordan was coming up. When MJ signed his deal, Nike got to write the very first chapter of his legend on a totally clean page. With Clark, Nike didn't get a clean page. They inherited a story that was already 3 chapters deep, with millions of fans who already had very strong opinions on how the rest of the book should be written. It's a completely different way of doing business, and Nike's 40-year-old strategy wasn't designed to handle an athlete who already owns her own narrative. For decades, the Nike way of building a superstar has always been a top-down approach. They like to sign an athlete early, way before the rest of the world realizes how big they're going to be, so they can stay in total control of the story. They pick the shoes, they pick the ads, and they decide exactly how that person fits into the culture. That control is the secret sauce that turns a $500,000 gamble into a $7 billion empire. Caitlin Clark basically blew that model up before she even signed her name. Her fans aren't loyal to Nike, they are loyal to her, and they were there long before the swoosh showed up. Nike can try to turn up the volume on that loyalty, but they can't change the channel or tell her fans what to think. They can't use their old top-down playbook because Clark started at the top, and there's nowhere for Nike to lead her that she hasn't already been. Then you have to look at what's happening over at Reebok with Angel Reese. Reese signed her own signature shoe deal with Reebok, and her version of the CC1 is set to drop in 2026. This isn't just another competitor trying to sell sneakers, it's a direct hit to Nike's dominance because of the culture surrounding these two players. Clark and Reese have the most profitable rivalry in sports right now, fueled by different styles and a social media world that treats every matchup like a season finale. That rivalry makes money for both of them, no matter who actually wins the game. The problem for Nike is that they only own one half of that rivalry. Reebok owns the other side, so every time a highlight goes viral or a fan compares their merch, Nike is giving Reebok free advertising. They can't control the conversation because the story needs both athletes to work, and Nike doesn't have the power to tell Reese what to do. The projections for the CC1 shoe are sitting at $100 million for the first year, which is a massive number, but the timing has to be perfect. Signature shoes live or die based on the hype of the moment, and if the launch is late or the ads feel too corporate, the fans will notice immediately. If Nike misses that window even by a little bit, they hand the entire narrative over to Reebok on a silver platter. Since Reebok is the underdog here, they don't have to do nearly as much work to win over the fans as Nike does. We're seeing the same shift with Shedeur Sanders, which proves that the Clark situation isn't just a one-time fluke. Sanders showed up with millions of followers and a brand tied to his family legacy, giving him more power than any draft pick is supposed to have. The NIL era created him just like it created Clark, and brands that used to prey on athletes who didn't know their own worth are now facing rookies who know exactly how much they're bringing to the table. Then there's the elephant in the room, the massive gap in pay. Clark's WNBA salary is only $76,000, even though she's bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars for the league through ticket sales and TV deals. That gap between the value she creates and the check she actually takes home is a ticking time bomb. When the next contract negotiations come around, the conversation is going to get very loud, and Nike might find that their current deal was based on a version of Clark that no longer exists. At the same time, brands like State Farm, Sephora, and Wilson are already deep in her world. They are building their own success alongside Nike without ever needing to ask the swoosh for permission. Every time Clark does something big with another brand, it's a reminder that Nike doesn't own her platform. They are just paying rent like everyone else. So how is Nike actually handling all of this pressure? We're going to break that down in the CEO scorecard, and while the grades might be better than you think, there are a few red flags that should make any executive lose sleep. If you were sitting in a high-stakes boardroom right now, you'd need more than just hype to convince a CFO to back this deal. We're looking at 5 key performance indicators, or KPIs, each scored on a scale of 1 to 10, to see if this partnership actually makes financial sense. For every pillar, I've included one solid reason for the score, and one major red flag that could ruin the whole thing. KPI number 1 is women's basketball revenue contribution and growth, which tracks how much money apparel and footwear are actually bringing in compared to the rest of Nike. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10 because women's basketball has officially become the fastest growing part of the company. We saw a double-digit percentage jump in 2025 that was tied directly to Clark's logo reveal and the massive surge in Indiana Fever interest, proving that the growth is both real and picking up speed. The big watch out here is category concentration risk, since women's basketball still makes up less than 5% of Nike's total sales. It's easy to get excited about double-digit growth when you're starting from a small number, but that excitement disappears if the growth flatlines or if the main star gets sidelined by an injury. KPI number 2 focuses on signature product sell-through and velocity, which is basically a fancy way of asking if the gear is flying off the shelves. This earns a 9 out of 10 because the early merchandise tied to Clark's logo rollout caused record-breaking traffic on Fanatics. Current projections put her first-year sales at over $100 million, and every piece of data we have right now suggests that the fans are ready to spend that kind of cash. Nike gets a near-perfect score here because the demand is undeniable, but they have to watch the execution window very closely. Signature shoe launches are incredibly time-sensitive, and the cultural heat driving these massive sales won't stay this hot forever. If there's a hiccup in the supply chain or the rollout gets delayed, it won't just hurt the sales forecast. It'll give Reebok the perfect chance to steal the spotlight. KPI number 3 is earned media value and the return on ad spend from the Clark campaigns. This is another 9 out of 10 because the amount of free publicity Clark generates through TV ratings and social media is staggering. When you look at the numbers, Nike's campaigns for her are actually more efficient than what they're spending on many of their top male athletes. The problem Nike has to solve is sustainability, because earned media at this level is usually tied to a specific cultural moment that eventually peaks. The marketing team needs to figure out what this looks like 4 years from now, when Clark isn't a news story anymore and the world starts judging her as an established veteran instead of a rising star. KPI number 4 covers licensed merchandise lift across Nike and the entire WNBA, and this is the strongest 10 out of 10 on the board. As we talked about earlier, league-wide merchandise sales jumped 500%, while player-specific gear skyrocketed by 1,000%, with Clark leading the way in jersey sales. Nike is winning twice here by capturing direct revenue from their own products and benefiting from the general rise of the whole basketball ecosystem. The only real danger is inventory management, because demand at this scale puts a massive amount of pressure on the people making and shipping the gear. If a fan goes to buy a Clark jersey and finds it out of stock, they aren't going to wait around, they're going to go buy whatever Reebok has available right then. KPI number 5 is social conversion and long-term brand equity, which gets a 9 out of 10. We've seen Clark's massive reach on Instagram and TikTok turn into genuine brand loyalty at a level we've never really seen in women's sports before. The watch out here is creative alignment, because as Clark gets older and her public voice becomes more defined, Nike has to make sure their ads keep up with her. The audience has a real relationship with the person, not just the brand. So the second a campaign feels like it's trying to manage her image rather than amplify it, the fans will check out. The overall grade for this partnership is an A-, which reflects elite momentum and great execution, but also a very narrow window of time to get everything right. Everyone keeps bringing up the Michael Jordan comparison, so let's put that side by side with what's happening today to see what it actually reveals. When the Air Jordan 1 launched back in 1985, Nike was still a company trying to find its footing in the basketball world. Jordan actually needed Nike's massive distribution and their marketing machine to reach the global audience that eventually helped him become a billionaire. Back then, the power dynamic only went one way, where Nike built the stage and Jordan was the one who stood on it. That isn't a knock on MJ, it's just the way the world worked before social media allowed a teenager to build a massive fan base from their bedroom. Caitlin Clark is launching her brand into a market she already owns, which means she didn't need a giant corporation to help her find an audience. Her fans were already there, they were already organized, and they were already looking for ways to spend their money. In this new relationship, Nike provides the infrastructure and the scale, but they aren't the ones who discovered the talent or built the community. This is a massive power shift that we've never seen before, and it completely changes how we should look at every single line in that $28 million contract. If you look at the Serena Williams era, you can see how much the speed of the game has changed. Nike spent nearly 20 years fine-tuning how they told Serena's story before they released the Dream Crazier campaign in 2019. That ad was a masterpiece because it was built on 2 decades of history, but Clark is being forced to move through that same journey in about 3 years. Because of the NIL era, college athletes are now making money off their names long before they ever turn pro, so the audience has usually made up its mind before Nike even gets a chance to speak. The long, slow storytelling runway that works so well for Serena just doesn't exist in today's world. The final piece of the puzzle is Angel Reese's deal with Reebok, and this is the one that should probably make the people at Nike the most nervous. Reese went from being a college star to having her own signature shoe on the exact same accelerated timeline as Clark. The market isn't interested in waiting for a 5-year brand development cycle anymore, and Reebok proved that by moving as soon as they saw the signal. They didn't waste time trying to build Reese into a star, because she was already a star when she walked through the door. When you look at all 3 of these examples together, you realize that the old rules have been flipped on their head. It used to be that Nike signed athletes so they could build them into brands, but now the athletes are the ones building the brands, and Nike is just signing the check so they can stay in the room. Think of this as a professional risk framework rather than just guessing what might happen. If you want to build a real career in the sports business, these are the exact scenarios you need to test against your own strategic plans. In the best case scenario, Nike turns Caitlin Clark into the Jordan brand of women's basketball. The CC1 clears $150 million in its first year. Women's basketball grows to represent more than 10% of Nike's total revenue, and that massive $2.2 billion media deal keeps its value because Clark's star power keeps people watching through her peak years. The immediate move for Nike is giving Clark actual creative control over her shoes and her ads before the partnership starts feeling like a cold business transaction. We saw the Jordan brand win because Michael had a real seat at the table, and the same rule applies here. If they want to reach that level, the base case gives us strong results that don't necessarily redefine the entire category. The shoe brings in somewhere between $80 and $100 million. Women's basketball grows by a steady 15 to 20% every year, and Nike stays ahead of the pack while sharing some of the spotlight with Reebok and Adidas. This outcome looks great on a quarterly earnings slide and keeps the investors happy, but the real work is operational. Nike would need to build product teams that can move at the speed of a viral tweet, because the time between a cultural moment and a product launch is now measured in weeks instead of months. Then there is the worst case scenario where everyone's fears actually come true. The CC1 launch fumbles. The marketing feels like it was written by a committee instead of a person, and Clark's fans notice that her real voice doesn't match what Nike is putting out. Cultural momentum hits a wall just as Angel Reese and Reebok grab the fans who want something more authentic. If this happens, the lesson is structural, and it means every talent at Clark's level has to be treated like a billion-dollar franchise from the very first meeting rather than trying to fix things after the market moves on. The difference between these outcomes isn't about the budget, since Nike has more than enough money to fund any of these paths. The real question is whether their internal corporate structure can move as fast as the culture Clark is already leading. Here are 5 things you need to remember from this video if you're trying to break into the sports business today. First, the era of the brand being bigger than the athlete is over. Players are showing up with their own massive audiences already built, and any executive who thinks they can dictate terms to a star like Clark is going to lose the deal before it even starts. Second, NIL deals didn't just flip college sports upside down, they permanently changed the power balance between athletes and sponsors at every single level of the industry. Third, You have to stop looking at women's sports as a risky bet for the future. They are a proven asset right now, and that $2.2 billion WNBA media deal along with Clark's $28 million contract are the numbers you should be putting in your next pitch deck. Fourth, being fast is now the only competitive advantage that matters. The window between a big moment and a product hitting the shelves has collapsed, and brands that can't close that gap are just handing money to their rivals. Finally, you should study the Jordan playbook, but don't be afraid to put it down. The market Clark is playing in needs a brand new framework that hasn't been invented yet, and the executive who builds it first is going to own the next decade of the business. Caitlin Clark didn't just change the price tag on WNBA players, because she actually shifted the power balance of endorsement deals in a way that isn't going back. If you check out Nike's last 2 earnings calls to see how they talk about women's basketball, their words tell the whole story. To see how NIL deals started this massive power shift across all sports, watch this next video.